massive Soviet military forces have invaded the small, non-aligned, sovereign nation of Afghanistan, which had hitherto not been an occupied satellite of the Soviet Union. 50,000 heavily armed Soviet troops have crossed the border and are now dispersed throughout Afghanistan, attempting to conquer the fiercely independent Muslim people of that country. This invasion is an extremely serious threat to peace because of the threat of further Soviet expansion into neighboring countries in Southwest Asia, and also because such an aggressive military policy is unsettling to other peoples throughout the world. This is a callous violation of international law and the United Nations Charter. It is a deliberate effort of a powerful atheistic government to subjugate an independent Islamic people. We must recognize the strategic importance of Afghanistan to stability and peace. A Soviet-occupied Afghanistan threatens both Iran and Pakistan and is a stepping stone to possible control over much of the world's oil supplies. The United States wants all nations in the region to be free and to be independent. If the Soviets are encouraged in this invasion by eventual success, and if they maintain their dominance over Afghanistan and then extend their control to adjacent countries, the stable, strategic, and peaceful balance of the entire world will be changed. This would threaten the security of all nations, including, of course, the United States, our allies, and our friends.
That was effectively the call for a jihad, and he says we will use public and private means to make that happen. The public means we know, and the private means we will find out about. How does it go about making that happen exactly? So that was a green light effectively. And then we enter, from 1980, we enter the golden age of jihad in the modern world. The golden age of jihad. If you want to be a mujahid, 1980 to 1991 was a golden epoch, the golden age of jihad in a modern epoch. The golden age. That was a golden age at the time because it was backed by America and Saudi Arabia. So Dr. Abdullah says, when the Western world saw that the Afghan people had high resolve, they decided to finance the Afghans to fight against the Russians. America sent out instructions to its agent states in the Middle East, so the agent states being Saudi Arabia primarily, Qatar and Kuwait, but most Saudi Arabia, to begin publicizing the news of Afghan mujahideen. So Saudi Arabia became the mouthpiece and the fatwa factory for the mujahid struggle in Afghanistan. The government newspapers in Saudi Arabia and publications in the Gulf began to give extensive coverage to the mujahideen in Afghanistan, to the extent that Saudi radio would cover the topic in its 5 daily broadcasts, speaking about the heroic stance of the mujahideen fighters. Consequently, charity organizations were established throughout the Saudi kingdom to gather money for the people of Afghanistan and the mujahideen. Orders were sent to all organizations to support this jihad effort, and the fatwa were issued by the scholars regarding the obligation of jihad. So at that time, the state policy was to teach the people about jihad, to encourage the young men who could go and fight jihad to go and fight jihad. And it was endorsed and financed by the state. 5 times a day throughout the Gulf, they would remind people what was happening in Afghanistan, what the mujahideen were doing. They had people such as, for example, Osama bin Laden and many other prominent Arab youth who were in Afghanistan, and so their updates would be publicized every single day. Okay, what was happening, what battles, so on and so forth. And so this was a cause célèbre. People were able to go openly, were encouraged to go and fight jihad. And the state was publicizing fatwa, endorsements, giving money, open charities, raising funds, and sending it to Afghanistan. Why? Why? The question is why? Why would Saudi Arabia and other Gulf nations suddenly be pro-jihad and make extra effort? In fact, he goes on to say, for example, orders were sent to all organizations to support this jihad. The scholars were in on it as well. However, this was only done after the permission of the Wali al-Amr. So this movement, or this policy, was only enacted once the Amir gave his command. So he says the Amir was the king of Saudi Arabia, King Fahd, who had his own Amir, who was 𝗲𝗎𝗓𝗓. So the Amir of the jihad was 𝗲𝗎𝗓𝗓. He gave the fatwa or the command to King Fahd, and King Fahd gave the command to the scholars, and the scholars gave the command to the people. So the Amir of the jihad was 𝗲𝗎𝗓𝗓, Mufti 𝗲𝗎𝗓𝗓. Okay? So he says at the time, Saudi Arabian Airlines were giving 75% discount to anyone flying to Pakistan with the intention of fighting jihad. So if you lived in Saudi at the time, but you had family in Pakistan, perfect time. 75% discount. But only if you're going to fight jihad. Okay. Another time, in fact, students from college and university, during their summer break, would go to Afghanistan. They would spend their holidays in Afghanistan fighting, then they'd come back to continue their schooling. Right? It was so open. It was so open and celebrated. In the West, they would call them freedom fighters. The Mujahideen were freedom fighters for that period of time. Right? And the media was supporting them, endorsing them. In the lectures, I'm going to show you some lectures actually now. Even in America, the du'at at that time, many prominent du'at at that time were pro-jihad and were openly calling for jihad. Openly calling for jihad at that time, right? And I've got literal audio for you to listen to here in a way that you could never imagine, right? All because America was happy or had an interest in a greater enemy. And so because of that, they endorsed jihad, and jihad became something that was acceptable, in fact, encouraged across the Muslim world and even in America.
Maybe just a little, sir. Just a little.
So here we're going to have a special envoy from America goes to Pakistan, and he's encouraging the Mujahideen to fight for the sake of Islam. Listen to this.
U.S. National Security Advisor Brzezinski flew to Pakistan to set about rallying resistance. He wanted to arm the Mujahideen without revealing America's role. On the Afghan border near the Khyber Pass, he urged the soldiers of God to redouble their efforts.
We know of their deep belief in God, and we are confident that their struggle will succeed. You know, that land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day, because your fight will prevail, and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again, because your cause is right and God is on your side.
The purpose of coordinating with the Pakistanis will be to make the Soviets bleed for as much and as long as is possible.
Do we know whether any Soviet units have reached these border posts?
No.
They're holding back.
They are holding back.
We started providing weapons to the Mujahideen from various sources again. Some, for example, some Soviet arms from the Egyptians and the Chinese. We even got Soviet arms from the Czechoslovak communist government, since it was obviously susceptible to material incentives. And at some point, we started buying arms for the Mujahideen from the Soviet army in Afghanistan, because that army was increasingly corrupt.
But this was done in World War I. The Germans also called for global jihad, and were also publishing pamphlets about the virtues of jihad, of shahada, were calling Muslims to fight jihad against Britain and France, and sought fatwa. So this was something that was done before in World War I by the Germans, was done again in the Afghan-Soviet war. So whenever it's convenient, they have no problem promoting jihad. And in fact, most of the mujahid or the jihadi organizations after that, during the war on terror, were trained by America. Most of them. Most of the key figures were American trained, CIA trained, financed and funded. It just so happens that after the war, they turned against the Americans. Right? So the greatest funds for terrorism came from the West and from Saudi Arabia.
Yes, I wanted to ask this question. It's controversial, but did they do something similar with Syria?
In which sense? You mean the recent?
Yes, is this something, because I hear a lot of narratives about this and I'm confused on where to land. But I know a lot of people were going to fight there from all over the world.
Apart from the recent publication, I don't know how authentic they are, to be honest, but some of these ISIS commanders were supposedly Mossad agents. They've been exposed as Mossad agents, yeah. So they were agents provocateurs, just sent there to create problems. So they've been, if it's true, they've been unmasked recently. There were Jewish agitators, Mossad agents who were sent to cause problems. We also know that the Iraqi secret services also had a part to play in that. They were also instigators. So there were many hands, hidden hands in that conflict, many agents in that conflict. The American conflict was open, it wasn't hidden. They openly promoted and endorsed the Mujahideen, raised funds, endorsed the cause, and even celebrated them as freedom fighters. So Saudi Arabia and America had given the green light. Jihad was now okay. Financing was being carried out in Saudi Arabia, across the world. The fatwa were coming out. In fact, on YouTube, there are many fatwa from the 90s about the virtues of jihad being given live, about the fard, the obligation, the farida of jihad, and the benefits of jihad. And we need to support the brothers and sisters in Afghanistan, and we need to be able to finance. If you can't go in person, finance them. You're going to hear it for yourselves, okay? I'm not making this up. That was the spirit of the age. In fact, as I said, the golden age of jihad was in the 90s, 1980 to 1990, the golden age of jihad. Okay. I came of age a decade later, in the early 2000s. And I remember, as I say all the time, you could get away with so much in London, in the UK at least, when it came to jihad. Brothers would dress up in Afghani outfits, right? Some of the military kind of outfits, right? The vest, military vest with white thobe and a military vest, Afghan style, or the combat trousers, right? It was clear, it was in the air. Certain brothers would travel back and forth, right? Bosnia, Afghanistan, Chechnya. It was known. It became a problem later on, though, when the tables turned. When the tables turned, it became a problem. And suddenly now we have issues when it came to fundraising for terrorists, when it came to talking about jihad, when it came to mentioning issues to do with political governments and political policies abroad, suddenly became a problem. But up until then, it was all okay. In fact, it was favored. People were traveling back and forth. If you know people who are in that age bracket, some of them will tell you, yeah, I traveled. I was in Afghanistan for a while, or I was in Bosnia, or I was in Chechnya. And this was something that was easily accessible. The material is easily accessible. The tapes, the books in the early 2000s, there was a series of tapes, and I had this series of tapes up until I lent it to somebody else. They never gave it back to me. But it was called the In the Heart of Green Bird series. And this was a series of tapes recorded on the battlefield in Bosnia. There were two, at least I had two. I had two of the installments. And it was a set of stories about how various Muslims from all over the world, from America, from France, from Britain, from Morocco, from Yemen, from Saudi Arabia, from Pakistan, they all left their homes and went to fight jihad in Bosnia. And it was the most powerful propaganda at the time. I wish I had a copy of that. It was in cassette recordings, The Heart of Green Birds. And within these tapes, they'll tell you, for example, this brother came from Yemen, and every night he would have a dream, and there was a hur came from heaven to him every single night and would say to him, I'm waiting for a marriage, I'm waiting for a marriage, and my mahar is your shahada.
أتيتك روحا تراءت ضياء تعالى فضجت ملاك السماء وراح يحلق تحت الإله يطير بفردوسه حيث شاء.
And so all these fantastic stories of brothers who were dying and suddenly misk came out from their wounds, or other brothers dying, coming back to this realm, coming down from heaven, speaking to the mujahideen, and going back to heaven. And on one occasion, they described one incident where the brother came back and everyone was looking for him. They couldn't find him. His body wasn't recoverable. And this brother went to jihad with 2 swords. They knew him as a brother with 2 swords. So on the battlefield, I don't know why you want to have swords when everyone's using machine guns, but he had 2 swords. And he got killed in the battle. And somehow, his body was not recoverable. And one day they found a brother, he just walks into the gathering. And he's basically, he's shining, he's bright. And there are 2 blonde Russians. I don't know why when it comes to this issue, it's always Russians. And they were accompanying him. Effectively, they were supposed to be Hurul Ain from Jannah. And the brother comes and he tells them, okay, my body's over there, you'll find it over there. And then he goes back and he disappears. The Heart of Green Birds, you won't find it anywhere. I think in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, there were some bookshops in Birmingham that would sell these openly, cassettes, books, tapes, and they were raided. And all of that material was basically taken off the shelves. I have a few of it left here for purposes, only for research purposes. That's why I've got these ones here. Published by the Azam publication. You won't find it anywhere in physical copy anymore. And also one by Abu Hamza al-Misri on the jihad in Algeria, which I'm going to be citing next month for that, the Algerian civil war. So it was an era where fighting jihad, you could sit on in Jum'ah in an open space and hear about jihad openly. Go and fight jihad. And the sisters were being told that if you have a husband and you don't want him to die fi sabilillah, you are selfish, you are wicked, you're a wicked woman. Wallahi, these are the things I've heard my own ears. That sisters who have husbands, who don't encourage their husbands to go and fight and to die on the battlefield, she is a wicked woman. She wants her husband for herself. So there was a great deal, at least in the circles I was in London, there was also guilt tripping. You know, you're living in the West, you have a nice life, your children are safe, you're not shedding a single drop of blood fi sabilillah, while others are dying, you're sitting here comfortably. You know, you should be ashamed of yourself. You know, you need to go and make jihad. And certain brothers went and made jihad. I know young brothers who went to Somalia. When the 𝗲𝗏𝗡 thing happened, they went to Somalia. And the same brother came back, my wedding, he came back and he goes, all I found in Somalia were Muslims killing Muslims. And he was so upset. He said, I went all the way to Somalia and all I found was Muslims killing Muslims. So he came back and he said, this is just a waste of time. Yeah? Others went to Chechnya. Many went to Bosnia. Yeah. So yeah, in those days, people were hardcore. The da'wah then was akhi, you know, at least in the circles, it was endorsed. And it was tolerated. It was tolerated by the secret services. There's a book, I've got all these books on jihad in the 90s. It's a very fascinating epoch. Inside the Jihad. It's a wonderful book. Honestly, if you want to read a really amazing adventure story about jihad in the 90s, that's the book to read. The brother's a Moroccan brother. And he joined, first of all, Tabligh Jamaat. Then he joined some of the Mujahid groups. And he went out into Afghanistan, into Bosnia, into Chechnya. And he fought. But he was a spy. While he was there, he came to his conclusion, this is not legitimate. So he became a spy. Eventually became a kafir. Okay? But in that book, a lot of details. Yeah? It was very easy. And he mentions the security services knew very well who was a spy and who wasn't a spy. And they were working with brothers. You know, there was a time in London, Finsbury Park Masjid, if you know London, they would have seminars where they would teach women how to assemble and clean Kalashnikovs in the basement. I couldn't make this up, right? That's how much it was accessible in London. No, Finsbury Park. Right? So this was a really different epoch, completely different. I don't look back at it as something that to be fond of. People did die. You know, people who I used to pray with did die. Children who grew up in the community. Some went to join ISIS, took their wives. They were only 18, 19. They lost their lives there. Others came out of Guantanamo, was sent, and then they went there. They lost their lives. Yeah, you see, where's the brother? Oh, he's in Syria. Where's the brother? He's in Afghanistan. He's in Somalia. Right.
We're saying that it's in the beginning of the 2000s. So was it after 9/11?
The beginning of 2000, 9/11 was really the turning point in terms of you can't speak out. So the censorship and where it began to be a bit more taboo, really began around that time. But even then, there was still the Chechen War, the Second Chechen War. And this was still openly talked about. For example, there was a magazine that was every week from the Mimbar. The Khatib would tell us what's happening in Chechnya, the latest casualties, or how much money we need to raise, and the latest occupation, and the latest victory. And there were tapes, there were VHS tapes being circulated. You can watch the actual operations. Because Khattab, at the time, had his own publication company. And he would record every operation, and then he would publicize it so people would know what really happened on the battlefield. So those tapes would reach us in London. There was also a website, 𝗃𝗃 Center, where you could watch everything and see the latest news on the battlefield. Yeah. That is a world apart from today's climate. Completely different. Not even recognizable. The early Nasheed style was all Jihad Nasheed. Right? It was, as at the very beginning of this presentation, you had that montage. The background is a Nasheed, Jihad Nasheed. You had the lion roaring. That was a classic beginning. You had the Kalashnikov in the background. That was a sound effect. And you had the takbirat, Allahu Akbar. These are the three components of any Nasheed in those days, right? And I had a massive collection of CDs at that time, Yeah? Every one of them was Nasheed, back to back. And this would keep you always pumped up for Jihad, right? I threw it in the bin one day because I realized there was a lot of hypocrisy. There was a lot of double standards, and there were many agents in the community. You know, when things really hit the fan, certain brothers in the community were being caught, they were being put on TV, they were being interviewed, and they would lie through their teeth, right? So I was still young. I realized the lies, and then I started learning properly. And many of the fatwa that they were giving were mixed with half-truths. So it was just a complete farce. Those who died there sincerely, may Allah accept them, but there was a lot of double standards, a lot of lies. So it was really an epoch, but all of that, to say this, was a result of the American da'wah. Because all of those people who came back from Afghanistan and Bosnia and Chechnya were influenced by the American da'wah in Afghanistan, all of them. So this was blowback for what was done in the 80s. And then after, of course, 9/11, we enter a new phase, the war on terror. And Muslims are really the word jihad even itself cannot be pronounced publicly. You can't even pronounce it anymore. So here we have some of the, really the popular names. This is Sheikh Osama bin Laden, who was, of course, the poster child, Tora Bora, Jaji. He was the lion of Afghanistan. The lion of Afghanistan, the face of the foreign mujahideen. He made the Saudis proud because of these operations against the Soviets, and he survived miraculously, and he was able to conquer and kill, and, fi sabilillah. So he was a sign of pride for the Saudi and Arab world. You have Khattab, the young Khattab. The Afghan Jihad was like a training ground for some of the most prominent mujahideen later on. So we know what happens to bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, which was established by CIA in Afghanistan. Khattab came from Saudi Arabia. And he became so prominent and so accepted and so famous that when they left Afghanistan, other nations called him. Yeah, Dagestan, Chechnya, there were people who were not being supported, and they called him to help them. And so he began to lead the jihad there, him and Shamil Basayev. So they became very big, very, very big. And this is, of course, 𝗵𝗡𝗡 al-Zarqawi. Yeah. So, and many others. These are just a few of the names. Yeah, but they literally made their mark in Afghanistan, and from there they spread out all over the world. Okay, you had the Algerian jihad in the 90s. You had the Bosnian genocide, which also attracted many mujahideen in the 90s. You had Chechnya, Dagestan jihad, which was headed by Shamil Basayev and also by Khattab. So all of those who were fighting in the Afghan jihad, after they left in 1990 and 91 it was ended, they went to other fields of operation and they continued fighting there. But only now they became terrorists, because now they were fighting against America and Britain. So suddenly they became terrorists. Yeah. But that's a story and a history that I'm going to reserve for the final episode, inshallah, for next month. Yeah. It's just fascinating stuff, fascinating history, honestly. So they began to fund and finance these people openly. You know, the Saudi royal family itself was financing bin Laden, literally. Okay, because at the time he was a sign of pride for Saudi Arabia. He was like the lion of Saudi Arabia on the field, punishing. There is actually a recording of Yusuf 𝗲𝙜𝙜, the son of 𝗲𝙗𝙜, who himself was assassinated a few years ago, shot in the head in broad daylight. There is, I'll put it in the recording, inshallah, in the editing, where he tells a long story about how his father, 𝗲𝙗𝙜, went to Saudi Arabia in those days, before the 80s, and somehow he met the bin Ladens. And at the time, Osama was a young man making da'wah, and he would give lectures, he would deliver lectures in the local masajid, in local centers. And 𝗲𝙗𝙜 says, his son says, we went to visit one of the lectures and we listened to him, and he was mesmerizing. He was mesmerizing. And when we finished the lecture, when he finished, he came to 𝗲𝙗𝙜 and said to him, you inspire me. I listened to your lectures against Jimmy Swaggart, for example, you inspire me. And the bin Ladens financed 𝗲𝙗𝙜's da'wah. I think it's IPCI, right? 𝗲𝙗𝙜 IPCI. His da'wah organization was funded by the bin Ladens. Yeah. And his son says, yeah, he had the actual, the check. I think 1.2 million at the time was given to him, to the bin Ladens. So that was a different epoch, completely different, because then it was normal, it was acceptable to be associated with the jihad. Yeah. Something that could not be tolerated today. So here we have, this is Abdullah Azzam, the author of The Lofty Mountains, and this was the chief recruiter, Sheikh Tamim. Okay, Sheikh Tamim and Azzam were both Palestinians, and they had both grown up during the Palestinian struggle. Eventually they left Palestine and they found themselves in Afghanistan on the front line. Now, Sheikh Tamim was the envoy for the Mujahideen. He was the one sent all over the world, Muslim and otherwise, to raise funds and to recruit people. And this was done openly done. So he went to Nigeria, for example, he went to Yemen, he went to Qatar, he went to America, he went to Canada, he went to Venezuela, he went to the United Arab Emirates, he went to Egypt. He traveled all over the place. And he was always being booked for conferences, right? In fact, he was so popular that people had to book weeks in advance just to attend the lectures, and they were still fully packed, fully booked. And this was in the West, openly, and in many of the Arab nations, openly.
Does this have any relation to the word mujahideen itself? Because many people here, they say mujahideen, and I don't know if the word itself has a meaning to many of the Americans over here or not. Could you please explain to us?
Yes, I will. I would like first to clarify something about this, that many people in America, I noticed this. This is my first visit to USA, but I noticed that some people here from lectures I had misunderstand the word mujahideen. They have bad information or bad understanding, or let's say misunderstanding to that word. They think mujahideen are people who attack people, just, or have hijack planes, aircrafts, like those who hijack the Kuwaiti aircraft. We are against this completely. This is not jihad. This is nonsense. Jihad is fighting for the sake of Allah, fighting for the path of Allah to protect our religion. We make jihad against those who prevent us from performing our religion, or from following our divine revelation in Quran. Those who prevent us from performing our prayers, like the Russians doing. By the way, one man, it said in the Russian television, when they asked him why you could weep Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and you are unable to finish the war in Afghanistan, he said, well, whenever we hear Allahu Akbar, this is the weapon that we can do nothing about. So we can fight mujahideen, but when they say Allahu Akbar, we cannot do anything. He said, we do urinate on our clothes. When we see Allahu Akbar, that's it. So alhamdulillah, we have this power of Allah Akbar. We do feel in our jihad that Allah is with us, because we are with Allah. We never kill women. Many times we have the chance of capturing their women, Russian women. And many leaders said we have captured them, we set them free. We did not touch them, because this is the characters of Islam. We are Muslims. We do not touch women, do not touch girls, and these who are doing hijacking is completely against Islam.
So are the leaders against hijacking and things like that?
All of them are against hijacking. We do not believe in hijacking. As Muslims, this hijacking is not fair at all. You are killing innocent people, like these two Kuwaitis who were killed. What was their crime? Why? Just because they were Kuwaitis, you killed them? Do you consider this is Islam? This is not Islam. This is against Islam. You don't kill innocent people. Go and fight those who are fighting you, if there is any fight. Go and fight the men. Don't kill people, innocent people who are not fighting, civilians doing nothing. This is not fair. This is not accepted in our religion. And you know what our Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, our Prophet told us and warned us not to touch even plant, not to kill plant, not to kill old people, not to fight those who are not fighting us. Only we do fight those who are fighting us.
That's true.
Let's listen to one of the lectures, or one of the from the Western Hemisphere in the late 90s to just about maybe late 90s, no, early to mid 90s. The same was also applicable in the West. So the du'at of the West, I'll give one example. My favorite da'i at the time was okay, so those were a few extracts. It's a bit grainy because it's again from the 90s, but you get the idea, right? It was okay at the time to even raise for the Algerian Mujahideen, which we know how that ended. Eventually, it was a bloody massacre, tremendous and really regretful events, but it was okay back then. So the Sheikh Tamim was able to travel globally and to promote, and there was no problem whatsoever. So what eventually happened was, of course, the Arabs in the Gulf region were investing more and more into the Afghan Jihad, and they would pick certain warlords who they would give money to, and they would eventually empower them to the point where the Afghan Mujahideen would turn against them eventually. So there were certain instances of the some of the Saudi envoys going to Afghanistan, and while they were listening to the lectures being given by the Mujahideen there, they realized that they had turned against their own word. So they began to speak badly about the Saudi establishment. They would speak badly about the Saudi king. That's when they realized that it may be a bad idea to finance these operations. It may turn against us and eventually bite us back. But it was already too late by then. Eventually, in 1989, the Soviets left Afghanistan. Now, depending on who you listen to, which source you take, some will say the Mujahideen were the ones who actually kicked them out, conquered and won, and effectively got them to surrender. Some will say it was because of the financial burden. The Soviet Union could no longer invest in the war, and so to avoid going completely bankrupt, they evacuated voluntarily. The truth is in between both of these, okay? The truth is in between both of these. Ala kulli hal, the Sheikh says, the Soviets entered Afghanistan on December 27th, 1979, and they left defeated and humiliated on February 15th, 1989, 10 years later. The war had lasted approximately 10 years. Later that year, on December 25th, 1989, the Soviet flag was taken down from Soviet embassies and institutions worldwide and was replaced by the Russian flag. So the Warsaw Pact, effectively, and the Soviet Union was abolished, effectively. So when they lost Afghanistan, the Soviet Union, the Eastern Bloc, was abolished, and all those member states became independent. So that was the end of the Cold War. It ended in Afghanistan. So he says, by the grace of Allah, the Soviet Union and its flag were thrown into the dustbin of history, and it was split into 15 states. So they all became independent states after that. Okay. So in reality, whether or not it was because of bankruptcy, or whether or not it was because of genuinely they were militarily being defeated, the world, especially the Western world, the first world, owes a great debt of gratitude to Afghanistan and Mujahideen. They owe a great debt of gratitude to the Afghan Mujahideen, because those were the people on the ground, whether they're from Arab nations or whether from Afghanistan itself. They were the ones who were able to eventually deal the death blow and completely eradicate the final traces of the Soviet war machine.
Welcome to HistoryUn, the world's leading online learning platform specializing in Islamic history. To discover the HistoryUn mobile app and participate in regular live and interactive seminars and tune in directly from your handset from anywhere in the world. Enjoy instant access to a growing catalog of on-demand streaming content exclusive to the platform, accessible from a variety of devices including desktops, tablets, and cell phones. Connect instantly with our global community of history enthusiasts via our private community forum. To find out more about our online history programs and resources, visit our website today at www.historyun.com.